Our keynote this morning is going to be from Jeremy Geelan, who is a domain expert on the future of the future. Very interesting, Jeremy. He's president and CEO of the 21st Century Internet Group Incorporated, which is a collection of innovative websites and social applications, all of which reflect the fundamental importance of the Internet in the 21st century. The rest of his bio is in the program, which you can read, including his background in terms of education, his training, and his professional exploits and expertise. So without further ado, the newest convert to parang music a la Trinidad and Tobago. Please, let's get the morning going with Jeremy, who is going to deliver our keynote on cloud computing.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Let's see if our AV gentlemen are awake and ready to show us the title of this keynote, which, as you see, is the new cloud-enabled world. So, apart from saying good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to everyone here, and thanking our hosts for inviting me, let's try and work out why they might have invited Jeremy Geelan to come to speak about cloud in Port of Spain. And for that, we could possibly turn, as I do every time I get to a new country. One of the great, pleasant things of traveling the world is you get to open up your laptop or your mobile device and go to Google. And I love coming to a new country because I never see Trinidad and Tobago. At the bottom of my Google, it says wherever the heck I am. So you go to Google and you think, I'm already feeling better. And then you think, how am I going to justify being invited all this way to talk about cloud computing? So you hesitantly type your name into Google. And you find 731,000 hits on Jeremy Geelan. I have obviously misspent my youth or my life. But that's not really why I wanted to show you Google. Remember how it anticipates what you put in. Using a technology called Ajax at the back end, it's anticipating your keystrokes. Remember that? It was just a recent addition. So now you start to type in Jeremy Geelan. When you get to the L, look what pops up. So for some reason, Google is convinced that Jeremy Geelan, for some reason, which we will go into later, and you can decide whether it's true or not, is to be a trusted source on cloud computing. There it is. It comes up as the first thing after my name. So that really is why I'm here. As we've just said, my actual sort of day job, President and CEO of the 21st Century Internet Group. Let's not worry about that for a moment, because I'm also president of Cloud Expo Incorporated, which runs Cloud Expos and has done now 11 times. So 11 conferences devoted to cloud computing, the largest cloud computing event in the world. We've had it in North America, we've had it in Europe, we haven't brought it to the Caribbean. Maybe that's a few years off yet. But what kind of event would people want to go to? Well, I can tell you, they want to go to this one. Imagine a room 15 times the size of the space we're in here as the exhibit floor, 15 times the space in here. Some of the stands of these 120 exhibitors are double-deckers with stairs. So it's almost like a renaissance going on in IT, certainly in North America. So somebody thinks that the cloud is special. I'm one of those people. But more importantly, what about the delegates? So we have up to 7,000, 8,000 delegates at each of these expos. You've got to picture the technical track has got 9 concurrent sessions. So you've got a room like this 9 times, all going on simultaneously. You've got a lot of people, a lot of energy. And I thought, well, I'm going to Trinidad. I should ask these delegates, you know, let's not take anything for granted. Why is it that you come? We've done 11 cloud expos already, and they're getting bigger and more thickly attended, and different levels of people coming. So I was trying to ask different delegates, and there were lots of them, why do you come to Cloud Expo? I wasn't tooting, you know, our horn. I was genuinely interested. And of all the different answers, and there were many, I've chosen one that I want to share with you from an IT manager who said as follows: when you're in a hole, you need to stop digging and climb out. I get that bit. I want to find out if cloud computing is maybe the ladder that I need. He didn't really share what his problem is, what his pain points are. We can infer them as we go along. We'll be able, I hope, to infer what his pain points were. But I rather like, the reason I wanted to share this, I rather like this idea of cloud computing as a ladder, because I'm quite a one for metaphors. So we're going to just table that for a moment. Maybe cloud computing is a ladder. Just sort of squirrel that away in your mind, and let's see what we can do with that. 7,000 delegates, they would have had 14,000 views of cloud computing. 21 experts, they've got 37 views of cloud computing. So we're going to have to try and make sense of it ourselves, and there have been references to it. For those of you who were here yesterday in Jeff Kaplan's keynote, he was also at Cloud Expo in Silicon Valley just 14 days ago. So how to make sense of something that we're all hearing about, but does everybody agree what it really is? Why don't we break it down? Simple way to gain cloud clarity, let's break it into three parts: the past, the present, the future, and see if that takes us to some insights that we can use here in Trinidad and Tobago. So the past. I mean, this is hardly history because the cloud is so recent. But do you remember this thing? The computer. Put up your hand if you remember the day you got your first computer. Come on, let's be serious. Do you remember that? I mean, it's not so long ago, right? It was quite an exciting time. It cost more than we could really afford, and then we got it and we unwrapped it and the whole manual thing, and then there it was, and you open it up, and then what could it do? I mean, you're probably actually more geeky than I am. For me, I was thinking it was just a very expensive typewriter. There was maybe games on. I didn't have time for that, so I was very busy using it as a typewriter. I liked the idea of laser printers. That was why I wanted a computer. So there you are. Talk about the law of unintended consequences. I needed a computer to type on. My children, when asked what's my profession, said he's a typist. And that's all they saw. I just typed. So that was fair enough. It's very humbling to ask your children what you do for a living. Then a fellow Brit came along, did he not? Around about 1990, 1991, depending how you date it, Tim Berners-Lee, now Sir Tim. And suddenly that computer, look how big they were, remember those? Suddenly there was the World Wide Web. Wow, World Wide Web. Who remembers hearing that term for the first time? Do you remember? I mean, we go back a bit, right? This is history in the making here. That's my sense. So suddenly now the computer could do a lot more. It wasn't just a typewriter, but it was the law of unintended consequences. I didn't know that. And we're going to return to this theme of the law of unintended consequences, because that technology came into my life because I needed to achieve something, but it brought with it all these other possibilities that I actually wasn't anticipating, but I was quick to capitalize upon. So let's pursue that theme a bit. That really changed things, and it went on changing. So I'm sure you've seen diagrams like this 100 times. Here's now what gets connected, just like that big desktop computer. Here's what's getting connected together. And the reason I show you this diagram is, look what happens next. That was what people have always used to represent the internet. They always used a cloud. So you'll hear all these discussions about who coined cloud computing or what. But you know what? No one coined it. It was always depicted, the internet, as a cloud. So when all these devices were connected to the internet, that was the diagram to explain how it went with those little dotted lines. Now you will see, and we'll talk about that later, all these other things connected to the internet, going by the name of the Internet of Things. But let's not get distracted by that just for a moment, because that is more the future. Let's now look at why cloud computing is so important technically. I know that this is not supposed to be technical talk, and neither will it be, but it's worth bearing in mind what the dynamics are. The 100 times effect, that's the best way to summarize this. Early internet, 10 million users, now we've got 1 billion. The number of websites originally, I mean, obviously not day one, but there were 1 million websites when everybody thought the internet was the hottest thing. Today we've got 100 million. Everything 100 times more. 100 times effect also extends, as I say, to these connected devices. Now here's a number thrown around. 5 billion would make it 100 times more than it was about a decade ago. But you know what? Don't believe that number. Way too low. 5 billion, I've heard 50 billion. put in that same sentence as the current number, and we'll be hearing a little bit, it's probably a lot more even than that. Why would such things matter? Well, they matter because if you connect all those devices across the internet, you're going to have an awful lot of problem dealing with that bandwidth. And if we keep going to put our refrigerators on and put our everything we can possibly have onto the internet, we're going to need an awful lot of bandwidth that we're going to eat up. Not to mention our videos that our kids are running and the downloads of illegal films and God knows what. So elasticity is what we needed. We've got enough bandwidth, but it's in the wrong place maybe at the wrong time. So how about we make it fungible? We just say, look, when the kids are downloading, it's over here, and when people are at work, it's over there. There's enough to go around, but we need to move it around. That was really the genesis of this notion of cloud computing. We're going to have to figure it out. We're going to have to figure elasticity and build it in. So that was the real inflection point, that things, they were working, but there is a rule. This is sort of the last technical point. There is a rule among engineers, I don't know if any of you are engineers, that roughly speaking, if you design a system for load X and it's now dealing with load 10X, might be time to revisit the architecture. So I don't know if you had 10 stores and you're running the accounting system and now you've got 100 stores, might be time to look at the architecture of what you designed. So think about that on the net when we're saying there's this 100 times effect. So that paradigm was not going to work. My simplest way of explaining to a layman what cloud computing is to say it's the new architecture to solve that problem. And with the desire to embolden them and say, so that problem is being solved. Believe me, the Internet of Things, you can get excited about it because we will be able to make it work, and some of the other things we're going to talk about. But it's still a bit technical, right? So why would this why would 7,000 people keep coming in a country like America to a cloud computing conference again and again and again and again? And I think that we can nail that one historically to, actually, it was also the month of November in 2006, and we can nail it to a man. If you were here yesterday, you saw Jeff obviously reference him, but let's put him front, left, and center. This man, CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, took what Business Week on the 2nd of November 2006 termed Amazon's risky bet. And the risky bet was cloud computing. Amazon internally had revamped their entire IT system because, 100 times effect. They were being incredibly successful. It's a great use case of something being successful and then needing to re-architect, and they re-architected with this notion of making it fungible, putting the compute where it was necessary, moving it around. And then they thought, you know what, that works for us. Maybe that would work for other businesses. Maybe, in fact, renting out IT infrastructure is a business all of its own, in addition to books, in addition to all those other things that Amazon does. It started its fastest growing ever business, dispensing cloud, which I guess was kind of risky because it doesn't sound like all those other things, and neither was it. And it worked. They launched this thing called EC2, Elastic Compute, so very geekily named, and probably we don't need to worry about that because Amazon is not necessarily the driver of all this now, which is what we're going to find out when we move to the present. So what is the present of cloud computing? Well, this is the only slide that I would ask you just to spend 2 seconds on, simply because that's what's going around the world. If you wonder, it doesn't matter where you are in your business or in your organization, you probably need to know that this is a slide that's being shown by vendors or by people who wish to sell you a cloud computing solution of some sort. And it's a pretty compelling value prop, and it does check out that all those things there, all that great things that you hear, utility billing, so appealing. If you're running a business, pay as you go. You don't have to make any commitment. That's nice. Jeff was talking about SaaS yesterday, software as a service. That you actually had to pony up and say, put me down for a year's worth of something. Better than 20 years worth of something, but cloud computing tops even that. Put me down for 20 seconds. Put me down for 20 minutes. Put me down for what I use. Not a penny more, not a penny less. That's very appealing. How about put me down for just a little bit on Monday and a heck of a lot on Tuesday, and then a little bit again on Wednesday, and then actually I'm launching something at the weekend. I might need more than I've ever bought from you. Absolutely fine. So this spikiness, which we'll get onto next, this spikiness if you're developing a business and it takes off. Yeah, the most difficult thing sometimes to prepare for is success from an IT point of view. Cloud computing solved that problem. So Jeff Bezos was onto something and Amazon were onto something. Elasticity, driving cost out of the business, that was nice. Moving it from being the famous value prop of cloud computing, moving from being a capital expenditure to operating expenditure. Just relates to your activity. You spend money on cloud because things are roaring at your e-store, or things are going fantastically at your video processing business, or whatever it is. Very appealing. So the business side of cloud computing, it makes its own case. It's one of those things like sort of solar energy, when they say you'll save, in the first year what you pay to put the solar panels up. All that good stuff. Very agile, driving cost out, infinitely scalable. I mean, obviously not infinitely, but massively scalable, and pay as you go. Very, very appealing to have those things. But what about real companies? That's the sales side of it. But shouldn't I be telling you more who's actually using it? Does it work? So I've started with EasyJet, because if cloud computing didn't work, these things would fall out of the sky. I say somewhat facetiously. In fact, EasyJet's interest in cloud computing was slightly different. They wanted to eliminate checkout, the checkout line. They didn't like the idea of those banks of people checking you in. That was anathema to them. They thought what would be much more interesting is to have self-service pods planted in, the check-in area, and then to have members of staff with handhelds who, if they could see you were taking too long or there was a problem, could intervene, and using their handheld speed up the process. And they decided they needed to re-architect all their IT to make for that kind of flexibility. And remember, they don't know what country they're going to operate in. I think they may be trying to come and operate here. How are they going to support that from an IT point of view without being indebted to Caribbean Air? The answer is they've got it all set up in the cloud. So EasyJet is a great proponent of cloud computing, agile company. Look at its, one of the only airlines with a URL on the side of it. So it is a very 21st century business, and it's opted for cloud computing. So it clearly thinks that it works, as does Coca-Cola for slightly different reasons. They've got operations, I think, in 174 countries. 174 countries, again, they're hoping for 175 or 176. They don't want to be constrained by IT when that happens, but they've got supply chains to keep track of, they've got accounting issues. They also need incredible IT flexibility. So guess what? Coca-Cola Enterprises is now entirely cloud-based. They went with, I don't know if we have anyone in the room from Microsoft, they went with the Microsoft solution, who you don't hear so much in cloud computing, but they are picking up speed, and that's their sort of premier client at the moment, is that Coca-Cola Enterprises uses Microsoft's Azure cloud. This one's from my wife, who's Danish. Maersk, the world's largest shipping company. Well, you guys have ports and things, so you must see these Maersk containers. They are literally all over the world. They went with another big vendor. I'm tossing out these names deliberately to grasp that nettle that, yes, cloud computing is a business, and it is sold by people. This is HP. HP has a private cloud solution. We'll talk about what the difference is between private and public in a little bit. And that's, Maersk is also there, sort of star client, $150 million on the first signature for making all your IT incredibly flexible and get the benefits of the cloud. But it's not only driving out cost or getting flexibility. Sometimes there's I think, a little bit more of a spectacular play. And Ford comes to mind, because Ford has gone a little bit further even than just driving out cost and thinking, there could be something really big here. I don't know if you've ever thought, when you're in your car, it would actually be quite useful from I know you have traffic as a huge problem, right? Particularly in Port of Spain. If all cars had an IP address, which is perfectly feasible. Lots of things would fall into place because, you know, never mind your GPS or whatever, it would be very easy to start to process the data of why the traffic has become such a problem at such an hour, at such a place. So that idea that maybe cars should have IP addresses has been there. Ford took it one further. They've invented what they call a concept car, the EVOS, and it will be essentially a cloud-enabled device. So if we went back some slides and looked at that ring, I didn't have a car there because I didn't want to give this away, but that's going to join the Internet of Things. A lot of cars, so you can do the math on that, and that really is coming. The reason I chose Ford, as you know, I produce conferences like this, so I'm kind of a trade conference fan. Here's an IDG event in Germany. IDG is an IT event. It analyzed the IT industry. This guy is the CIO of Ford, the Chief Information Officer. So for me, that was another little inflection point. Imagine that the Chief Information Officer of a motor car company is invited to a cloud computing event because that might be one of the biggest plays ever in the cloud. I kind of like that. And then I wonder, you know, I'm sure you've all got your smartphones or whatever. I don't know if you're great Apple fans, but I wonder whether we're so very far off. I know that Ford are not going to be launching an iPad anytime soon, but I'm not so certain that Apple won't be launching a car. So if you heard that here first, just think about it. It makes perfect sense. The CIA, of course, they've had a bit of a bad press just recently, but let's put General Petraeus aside and think of their IT demands. The CIA is very keen on keeping track for, we think, the best possible reasons. I don't have any political view on that, but it keeps an awful lot of track. And to do that, it uses private cloud. So I promised you we'd talk terribly quickly about that. Well, of course, central intelligence agencies are not likely to want to push their sensitive data into, if you remember Jeff's term from yesterday, a multi-tenant situation. They're not going to put their data on my server that I've rented to them and then some other information is right next door. Not a good idea. So they have essentially a private cloud solution. They still want that lovely flexibility. They want to be able on a Friday night to analyze 450,000 voice calls over 15 years in the Middle East because of a clue that came on Thursday morning. And they need a sudden spike of compute power. And cloud architecture can give them that, but they want the privacy. So they are going to have to reach in their pockets. They are going to have to use their own servers, and so they do, and so they will continue to do. But I've had the CTO, so the Chief Technology Officer of the CIA, twice speak at Cloud Expo, and the hairs stand on the back of your neck when you hear what kinds of budgets we're talking about for these private clouds that are being used by the defense agencies. I mean, the numbers are staggering. Since we're on that federal sector, a gentleman here from Oracle has asked me just earlier before the presentation began why sometimes traction in the federal sector can be slow. It won't be slow for very long, I replied, and I stand by that, because we have this cloud-first mandate from the CIO of the government, which, by the way, in itself is new. America appointed a Chief Information Officer. It now has a Chief Technical Officer, America. That's something we might think about in a Trinidad and Tobago context. Do you have a CTO? Do you have a CIO? Have you even thought about it? We don't have in the UK, I hasten to say. So CIA is a great user of cloud. So again, that you would think that's a fairly convincing use case, that the cloud must be secure. So we've looked at some of the aspects of, if you're running planes, that's real time, right? You can't say, don't make your bookings on EasyJet. Sorry, you can't check in, we're down. It's just not a possibility. Not a possibility. Cannot happen. So we know that the cloud must be fail-safe, just as good as any in-premise solution will be. It has to be, or you can't sell it to people. We know it's got to be very, very flexible because we talked about Coca-Cola enterprises that might start up anywhere. Now we've got a CIA example. We know it's got to be very secure. We've got the Ford example. We know it seems to have, there's something in the air innovative about cloud-enabled cars. You know, maybe there's different things you can do. You know, the smart car, that name has been used for the eco-friendliness of cars. But what about the fact of, reporting in, knowing where all these cars are? You know, possibly stripped of who owns them to help with traffic flow situations. But there are other things that the cloud does. Zynga, I don't know if any of you are gamers. I'm not a gamer. Do you know, who knows what the game Farmville is? You see, a few people may be reluctant. But Farmville was the fastest growing game that I think anyone has created. Had, a few thousand users one day, then suddenly it was millions of users. I think by now, I can't quite remember the statistics, but I believe they're pushing 1.4 petabytes of data, which in this crazy world that I live in, where people know these things, that's 10 times the entire data input of Netflix. Right? Think of Netflix, think of all that video. So just this gaming application has needed immense amounts of compute power, which, again, it got from cloud. Here's another good example. It was actually getting it from Amazon. So this loops back into Jeff Bezos. That's how it started. Why wouldn't you get it from Amazon? It was so cheap. It was cents instead of, tens of dollars. And then it could scale, but then, they wanted to make a real business, and they decided they ought to invent something themselves. So they've invented something called Z-Cloud. So just to give you this notion, we've got private cloud and we've got public cloud. We've also got these hybrid solutions where people say, well, when the rubber hits the road, we want to know that we're going to be up. So let's put it in our own cloud. Maybe that's, what we'll do for our core business, and perhaps get the spikes from Amazon. So that is a sort of hybrid cloud approach to a business that's grown. It had a few share issues, but it's grown incredibly fast, as has it's another household. I'm pressing the wrong button, sorry. Dropbox. I don't know if any of you are users of Dropbox, so that's cloud storage. Dropbox online storage, again, 100 million users. But it didn't have 100 million to start with. It was just an idea, but the functionality was good. People liked the name. I don't know, they liked the logo. It was largely free. So we'll talk about business models in a minute. Now, 1 billion files saved every hour. 1 billion files saved every hour to Dropbox. We mentioned maybe processing all that traffic information. That would be a good example, as would the CIA, with voice calls of big data. What is big data? You can't go from this conference this week without having this in your brain, that big data and cloud computing somehow are going hand in hand. Big data is simply a data set too large to be handled by the sort of server that you've got in your small business. But it turns out that some of that data, those data sets, large though they are, could be really useful to you. So if you could find a way of processing all the tickets that you sold for every conference for the last 50 years, you know what? The cloud is perfect for that, because you only need it the time that you want to make that computation and find out why it is. We notice whenever we open on a Sunday, we get a full room, and if we open on a Thursday, we get an empty room, and if it's 9 o'clock, and so on and so forth. Obviously, that's a very small example. I can think of a better example. Sorry to do these surveys all the time. Put up your hands if in the last 18 months you contracted the disease that killed Steve Jobs, but are still here to tell the tale. Pancreatic cancer kills you very, very fast. But if you're really lucky and you get to it early, you do all sorts of things that you don't want to know, and you live. So that's nice. But I didn't invent the apple, but I did manage to get the same thing as him. One of the headlines, therefore, that attracted me over the last 12 months, like I liked the car thing, was, can cloud computing cure cancer? Right, that would catch anyone's eye. Can cloud computing cure cancer? And of course, it's just a catchy headline, but really it's a big data play. It's asking the question, could pancreatic cancer patients, now I'm cured, so I shouldn't call myself a patient, but can pancreatic cancer sufferers, or all cancer sufferers, pull their genetic data? Can it then be processed in some way that goes, there are all these correlations that we simply didn't have the compute power to make any sense of. And now we have this very very, very nuanced approach to which things are operable, which things are inoperable, what type of chemo might work, doesn't work, could work, should work. So I got a real interest in big data, and that is a big, big play, the healthcare sector. So this idea that cloud and big data are kind of the two horsemen of the future, bear that in mind, because I think that that is the case. And you might think, what a silly name for something so serious, big data. But it, you know what? It does nail it. It's just these huge, 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 huge data sets. Again, go back to the federal sector. When America vows to put data into the public domain, this is a big country. So just to put up everybody's tax records, to put up everybody's, they have all sorts of things in the cloud that you could only do in the cloud. You couldn't possibly do it on servers at home. And I'm going to give you one more, while we're on the present, one more acronym. I'm sure you've heard it, but if not, again, remember you heard it here, because you will be hearing this a lot, and I think it applies especially to the islands here. I'm going to get my finger on this right button. SMAC. I do like this one. SMAC. Anyone heard of SMAC? Oh, we're getting lots of firsts here. Right, you heard it first here. SMAC is this combination, and bear with me, because I hope to prove that this is something that might be more relevant to Trinidad than almost anywhere else, of social, mobile, analytics, cloud. So analytics, I just mean what we talked about, big data analytics, being able to crunch data and see if there's value in it. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but at least we can now crunch it. We have the capacity because we have the cloud. Social we'll get onto in a minute. Mobile, we've talked about, yeah, in previous sessions, and I know in future sessions. Mobile, island culture, mobile is always going to be keen. I know you've all got your phones, you've all got more than one device. We heard that statistic, didn't we? 168% penetration can only be because you've all got more than one device. Let's just pause to remember, you know, we're in that realms of statistics. The average smartphone, so that smartphone you've got in your pocket, has more compute power than all of NASA had when it sent 2 astronauts to the moon in 1969? Now my dates escape me. But that's a true statistic. So you've got a little kind of NASA in your pocket. Apparently you've got 1.68 NASAs in your pocket. But I think that you're only beginning to see what you've got in your pocket. Like when I had that computer, because I thought it was a typewriter. And then I found out all these other things. So it's like you've got 2 Trojan horses in your pocket. And who knows what's going to jump out. Well, we should try and think what could jump out, because that's really what the future is about. What could jump out in this country, in this region, and in this world? Remember we talked about the math of how many devices were connected to the internet, and I said that 5 billion seemed awfully low, and I'd heard it by an order of magnitude. I'd heard it as 50 billion, and then I said, actually, I've heard it more. Guess how much more? The CTO, so again, Chief Technology Officer of Cisco. I've all heard of Cisco, right? We know that they know whereof they speak. They don't run the network, but they are heavily involved in making sure that the internet works, so they should know whereof they speak. The CTO of Cisco, she said in 2010, when this Internet of Things was already a phrase, and that was what she was thinking of when she said it, she said that in her view, this is 2010, by 2013, oh my God, 2013, that's pretty soon. By 2013, there will be 1 trillion devices connected to the internet. Now, I'm not a mathematician, so I wanted to see what a trillion looked like, and there it is. That's the CTO of Cisco sitting on top of her trillion. Obviously, for her, a huge business opportunity. But I just wanted to plant this seed of this uncertainty, orders of magnitude. It sounds like the US federal budget. You know, you wonder whether the government really has a fix on those zeros sometimes. And certainly this sounds strange. I've had 5 billion, I've had a trillion, I've had 50. What is going on? So I think we have a duty of care at an event like this. There's 2 days, all this information, all these real data points, at perhaps not listening to the CTO of a Fortune 50 company who's obviously got an axe to grind, and not listening to political parties or anybody partisan really, which is why I was invited, because I'm not partisan. I don't have an axe to grind. So why don't we try and digest? I've been at every session except for one yesterday afternoon, and I think that there are some definite trends that I can sense from the speakers and from the questions and just in general from the conversations, from the networking and from being out in the floor. And what therefore would be, in my view, some of the main takeaways? We still have today to come. But what would be some of the main takeaways? And one, I think, is that what I call IT, I know that you like this term ICT, which I also like. I'll return to that. The C, communications, a hugely important part. But in America, you know, it's been called IT for so long. I can't really say it easily other than just, it's IT. IT is trending towards BT, business technology. What do I mean by that? I mean that no longer is IT this ivory tower thing run by geeks that, you know, you ask of something and they say can't be done or can be done but next year. Now the business, the CEO is saying, this is what I need, I know it can be done, get into the cloud. If that's, that doesn't have to be the cloud, but let's use this as an example. Get it into the cloud, I want this running by Monday morning. And it's unnegotiable. And it's working. To go back to our Oracle gentleman here, the delegate, perhaps it's not working quite as fast at governmental level, but still Cloud First is premised on that. We know it can be done now, and we know it doesn't cost as much as any other way, so we're not really going to be taking no for an answer. That is a huge change. You know, I know we're in internet times, so this history is very fast considering that the web was only there, you know, from 1991, and we're talking in 2012. But that's a huge change, that IT is now a driver of business in the way that perhaps other things used to be a driver. Obviously, you know, design is still a driver, all sorts of things. Customer service is a driver, but IT itself, which empowers customer service perhaps to be better, allows design to be better. You can crowdsource the design of your latest dress and make it better. So there's one big trend, and somehow in the conversations, perhaps that's because we've got the government sector here, and I mean this in the most positive way. I think here in the region, IT, which is trending towards BT, is sort of going one stage further, towards ST. This is my own made-up term for the purposes of this conference. So social technology, what would that be? That means putting compute power in the service of ourselves to make things better, to make lives better. Yes, also to make businesses better. Nothing wrong with that. Yes, to make profit. But I get a real sense of positive social attitude from this room, and have had, I want to say all week. It feels like we've been together all week. So this is interesting, because guess what we said in our acronym? Mobile, yes, but what was there also? Social, SMAC, social and mobile. So I think you're actually positioned ahead of the curve, perhaps without knowing it. And I'd like to be somebody who helps you see that, because of all the different takeaways, never mind the profit, never mind all those big companies, those slides I showed you. Surely the key takeaway to take from this conference is that IT, and now I will put the C into it, is being democratized. That doesn't mean it's being commoditized. You've heard that term too. I'm sure, you know, now it's so cheap, it doesn't really matter, you get it from X or Y. I don't mean that side of it. I genuinely mean it's being democratized. I've heard the minister, good morning, minister, again and again talk about how you're using IT to empower the rural parts. Now, there is a classic proof point of IT being democratized in this region, positively, deliberately, I think very excitingly. And you know, that's not necessarily true in maybe other markets that are perhaps raw, and where, you know, the less well-off or the less well-positioned aren't necessarily being looked after as well. So I find that exciting. Cloud computing lends itself to this. It has this sort of triple whammy, terrible American term that, but it kind of fits, because the cloud has technical value, it has commercial value. And I'm adding for this conference that it has social value. I mean, I don't mean Facebook. I mean much more fundamental. I mean, egalitarianism. I mean access to services, access to funding, perhaps, access to learning. That kind of social component is something that I'm very strongly picking up from this symposium, and I hope on future symposia, that is something perhaps unique to this region, something that you could perhaps really be the pathfinders at. Look at that. That was the logo I sat looking at all yesterday, and I was thinking, yeah, you know what? iGovTT is onto something when it has those 3 words at the bottom. Look, you have been redefining IT in this room since I first got here. Intelligent technology, integrative technology, innovative technology. IT is up for grabs. You can redefine it to your own cultural and social needs. That fellow there is my 600-pound gorilla. It's another very Geelan-esque term, but it seems to me to be very simple. Co-technology. I'm wondering whether that might not be a huge opportunity in this country, on these islands, and also in this region, because one of the conversations, I don't know who was here at the ministerial panel, where there were real conversations about, you know what, we're solving problem X. Would you like the benefits of problem X, the solution, over here? Why reinvent the wheel? And maybe in turn you've solved problem Y. Co-technology. Solve a problem in one place using IT, and then help another place to solve that same problem using IT, and vice versa. That seems to me to be something that's in the air here, which is very, very positive. So then I was thinking, all right, so if co-technology is somehow, in the DNA of this region, then maybe there are examples from a business point of view that could give you inspiration. And I've lived in many, many countries. My wife's a diplomat, so I lived in some very strange countries. One of those countries produced 3 household names, and yet it's a country of 1.4 million, so not so far off, okay? Here are the 3 household names. If anyone knows the country, just shout it. Hotmail, first ever webmail. I mean, email, simple co-technology, right? I write to you, you get it. We work together that way. It was really the first co-technology, by my definition. Kazaa, this same country, less fortunate this one because that was file sharing, and that was illegal. And it got closed down. But you've got to give them initiative. So this is the same country, invents the first ever webmail. The Hotmail, by the way, that's why it now has MSN, was sold to Microsoft for what was then an astronomical sum of $400 million. It really doesn't sound very much now, but it was an astronomical sum at the time. Kazaa was closed down, but this same country invented this one as well. Anyone know the country? Estonia. Little Estonia, with its Russian heritage, maybe you've heard of Ukrainian programs. They're really good. Estonians are way better. Estonia is fiercely proud, highly cultural, very independent country, but has been stomped on, by the Germans and then by the Russians, and then a horrible history. But it's independent now. And since its independence, which is really just like yesterday, since its independence, it's put those 3 household names together. And there's, I think, a takeaway there for this audience and those that you influence, particularly the latter. Right? It's not just you. We're not trying to just cause an epiphany, perhaps, in someone here, but we want them to pass that on. If this little nation can invent 3 household names, and only 1 got closed down, that's a pretty good batting record. 2 out of 3 hits. Skype sold to, I'm not suggesting that that's the reason one creates software companies. It wasn't the reason they created Skype. They wanted to solve a problem. But it did sell to Microsoft. Anyone remember the number? $8.5 billion? That's a chunk of change, $8.5 billion. And a lot of it is still in Estonia. It had a Swede and a Dane involved, so it was sort of a Scandinavian company, but the engineers were all Estonian. They all have, they've really created an ecosystem, and not dissimilar to Silicon Valley, just with that money. So much of that money is still in this little Estonia that they are using that to build the next generation of IT applications as innovative as first Hotmail, then Kazaa that was closed down, and Skype, which is a thing of beauty, I think. I'm a great Skype fan. So I'm wondering whether there isn't something there for you guys. Let's look at little Estonia. Look at where it is. It's the middle of nowhere. There it is. Just so many people don't know. You know, just across from Helsinki, just one side of Russia, which of course occupied it. But look how small it is. And, you know, it's really in the middle of nowhere, and it didn't make any difference to these guys. They just got on with it. So I'm thinking that this notion perhaps of co-technology, because it seems to be in your spirit, and this competitive spirit. Why not compete? Didn't bother Estonians that they were taking on the world. Microsoft bought them. You couldn't get any bigger than that. How cool is that, to have taken on the biggest software company that's ever been created, well, until Apple and whatever, and be bought by them? That's quite a validation. So here's my vision. Go back to Google where we began this talk and put in this time, not Jeremy Geelan, waste of time that, put in Trinidad and Tobago. Look how many hits you got. I only got 731,000. 44 million for Trinidad and Tobago. Now there's branding. You've got a household name. I know it's a truism to say that a nation's name is a household name, but sometimes we forget, right? And sometimes they can get tarnished. The USA is a household name, and you know what? I don't fly American Airlines because it says American Airlines. So, you know, brands can go both ways. But I don't know anything negative about Trinidad and Tobago. Perhaps I don't know enough about Trinidad and Tobago. Perhaps there's an opportunity there. So let's do that other experiment of starting to type in Trinidad and Tobago and see what comes up. I did this morning, so see what comes up on the 21st of November, 2012. Look, Yellow Pages, passport form, stock exchange, electricity commission. I mean, I imagine that tomorrow morning, because Google reindexes itself at least once every 24 hours, we will have natural gas up there. For sure. Congratulations on the trillion cubic meter discovery by BP. But how about if innovation came up there? How about if e-government came up there? I-government, some of the things that we've talked about at this conference. Why not? You know what? Actually, it reflects activity on the web. That's why Jeremy Geelan is there 731,000 times, not because of any other reason that I'm web-based. Some of the things we've talked about at this conference will obviously be web-based. The more you do, the more it will be reflected. I know it's an odd metric, but I picture coming back in a year's time or 2 years or whenever the next symposium is, and I'm going to do the same game, and I know that Ajax is going to return something more exciting than the Electricity Commission. I just know it. I know it. You can quote me. I'll keep that slide and I'll show you in a year's time. So to conclude, because that's also what we're here to do, try and get us on time. The cloud, well, my delegate there thought it was a ladder. I don't know. You can't take much up a ladder. You can't take much with you. So I'm not sure that works as a metaphor for me. I quite like the road metaphor. I know the information superhighway was done to death. But let's just keep road in there as one possibility, because roads don't decide where you go. You know, you make the journey. So, you know, that's the thing about infrastructure. It doesn't decide your business for you. It doesn't decide your organization for you. It doesn't decide your society for you. It just gives you the wherewithal to push in this direction or that direction, to experiment, to fail, of course, to start things that fail. Very important. Let things fail. Some things will fail if you have enough initiatives. So road is one thing. You know, the North American influence has made me think of blast-offs. You know, it hasn't just, cloud computing is not just taken off, it's gone into orbit. But you know what? That's just that is hype. Yeah, who cares? Where does that take us? I've got a notion that I want to send you away with that's a little more nuanced than that cloud computing is blasting off, let's get on board. Because, you know, where the heck is it going? Just up into the stratosphere. Great. So I'm going to ask you to consider a New Zealander. You've got to mix it up with the nationalities. It's a New Zealand mountaineer, and his name is Russell Bryce. We've talked a lot about CIOs, Chief Information Officers, CTOs, Chief Technology Officers. I've nominated or named Russell Bryce to be the honorary CIO of the collaboration era and the cloud-enabled era in particular because of this. Russell Bryce was a mountaineer, and he conquered Everest. So that makes sense, you know, because it was there and all of that. But then he didn't come to one of my conferences, alas, but he somehow himself experienced an epiphany, and it was as follows. I could climb Everest again, I suppose, or I could help others to climb Everest, leveraging my experience from having reached the summit. See where I'm headed with this? Do you know how many people he's helped up Everest? Admittedly using IT, though that's almost accidental. Everything today will have a component of IT. Maybe it was just GPS, but you know, I'm not going to claim this as a cloud-enabled play, because that sounds too ridiculous. But I do like this idea that he felt he had a duty of care, having reached a summit, to help others up that summit. If I have any duty of care, it's that of, you know, a bee that is lucky enough to go to different flowers, and I'm really a very stupid bee, but you know, along my legs sticks all that pollen, and then when I go to the next flower, perhaps there's some blossoming going on, perhaps not. It's more chaotic, more random than I like to know. But I would say this: if anything that you've heard here resonates with you, anything that you heard Jeff say, anything you heard we've had some excellent sessions, more sessions to come today, anything you've heard in the brief time that I've spoken, anything at all, don't forget to pass it on. And if any of this leads you to business success, don't forget to pass that on. Don't forget to pass on how you got there, why you got there, what tools you used, what funds it required. Pass it on. Be Russell Bryce. And we've talked offline mostly, but I'm sure it's okay for the organizers if I say it in public, about having more young people at this symposium, both at future events and perhaps in the interim, because this is one of these perfect storms. If you are positive the way I am, we have a classic perfect storm coming up. We have our generation, I'd like to think, is positively engaged with the world, trying to make it better. Our children, by the look of us, most of us have got children, have inherited that spirit, that duty of care to make things better. And when they have children, we have the first triple whammy, the first 3-generation positive change world. So without going, you know, all tree hugging, this is something I really believe will translate in the IT sector, in the business sector, in the social sector. These 3 generations, all in alignment, using some of these incredible tools to create a better world, a better future. What is not to like about that? I may say that the cloud is going to play a role, but that's really not the issue. So, I'm sorry, I've now revealed that Wayne Gretzky, I was talking with the CEO of our platinum sponsor, David Belgrave. He's lived in Canada and is a hockey fan. So I thought, well, Wayne should finish us off. Wayne Gretzky was interviewed as to, he's the greatest ice hockey player ever lived. I'm not even an ice hockey man, and look, I'm clumsy too. And reporters said to him, Wayne, you know, you've dominated these ice hockey leagues forever and forever. Clearly, they pay you big bucks. They're so happy. What is the secret of it? What is it they pay you the big bucks for? It seems to me, the reporter said, that it's because you're always in the right spot at just the right time and you score. And I mean, it's amazing. Is that the reason? Wayne Gretzky said, no. You really misunderstood it completely. I'm not paid the big bucks to be there where the puck is so I can score. I'm paid the big bucks to be where the puck's going to be so I can score again. So that's what I want to be another takeaway from this symposium. To those who weren't here, and to all of our children, and to their children, what does IT do? It allows you to create. If you create, you can literally be what's next. You can make what's next. You can do what's next. We talked about with the minister, thinking what's next. Let's make this symposium somewhere that makes those 3 words resonate through this country. Be what's next. Thank you very much. Did I catch you up?
No, You stay right there. You stay right there. I think that this, for me, if there is a bias, this probably has been the most exciting presentation thus far and inspirational. Really has been. And so the floor is open to add, to ask, to comment before we go to break. I know that Jeffrey has given us so much, and there's so many takeaways. I mean, you've listed 4 or 5. But I think all through this, apart from all of the technical and whatever it is, it really is the philosophy and that mantra of be what's next. Yeah. So is there anyone on the floor? Anyone at all? Don't be shy. Even if you want to say, I think it was great, or I didn't think it was so great. Simon.
Let me see VD here.
Does Simon know, let's put him under judge. Does Simon know the old saying about questions?
Yes.
You know how clever a man is by what he answers. But you know how wise he is by what he asks.
Oh, okay.
Good luck.
I thought you were going to say there are no stupid questions.
Good luck.
But let me start by saying, especially on behalf of the Business Roundtable, fantastic presentation. I think to the point, you introduced a lot of concepts that I think the audience will certainly take away. Big data. I like your acronym, SMAC. As you know, I'm also work at IBM, so a lot of those things are also relevant to what we talk to our clients about. But if you could spend a few minutes, maybe, and in your acronym SMAC, and you didn't elaborate as much on the analytics part of it, and I know we have a presentation this afternoon on analytics as we talk about competitiveness for not just companies, but also in the public sector, and I think you alluded to that with respect to things like national security.
Take a really simple public sector example, which I don't know whether it applies, because now you say you have this traffic problem. And countries are doing this, and I think I would call that a SMAC solution. So in a lot of countries, you take out your mobile when you're waiting for a bus, you hold it up against the bus stop, and it tells you how many minutes till the number 18 comes and takes you to your destination. Now, actually, that's a simple thing, but when it goes wrong, it's going to be crunching a lot of real-time data in a complex city, so in Tokyo or wherever. So there's a combination of big data. It needs the mobile piece to make it convenient. I think it's social because you would say, I met my wife in Israel. I'm not Jewish, but I met my wife in Israel, and one of the things they had done was to democratize, to use that term again, cigarettes. They didn't seem to have any cost. So you just asked for a cigarette. And it was something I'd never seen, but I wasn't even a smoker. But I was fascinated. People said, cigarette? They didn't even really say please. And I think there's this social aspect to when you've all got your 1.6 mobile devices. If I don't, or I've forgotten it that day, there is something social. Could you just tell me, is my bus like 2 minutes away or 4 minutes away? Because if it's 4 minutes away, I might get a cab. But if it's 2 minutes away, I'll hang on. So I perhaps have this, I invented this notion of, does anyone know what sounds stupid, you think I'm a Google freak. Do you know what a Google whack is? Why would you? A Google whack is, you take a colloquy, so a 2-word phrase, you put it, as I did with Jeremy Geelan, you put it in quote marks, you plant it into Google, and you only get one return. So I invented this word, which IBM ought to have invented, social computing, the colloquy, and could put it into Google. And it was enough years ago that there was no one else who had ever referenced this except myself. So I say that just as a precursor, that I'm biased toward this social aspect of technology. I think that's the unlocked potential. God bless IBM for trying to turn it into a business model. I mean, knock yourselves out. Facebook turned it into their business model. No one objects. No one says, oh, Facebook are filthy capitalists, right? And Zuckerberg is a very rich man, but I don't see anybody who shows any animus towards him. So I think it's going to depend how people unpack that social. I see things social that perhaps other people don't see, particularly businesses don't see it that way. So the analytics piece would be anything that could help me. So think of now I was just in the USA before that conference for this superstorm. They learned from Katrina all these things about how you can use the net socially. Do you remember some of the stories? So, people couldn't make phone calls, so they just didn't know if their loved ones were alive. But what you could do is to put a post on a site saying you were alive, and then anybody could get into that. It bypassed the the mobile networks. So, these are sort of ad hoc examples, but I think once we're sensitized to the fact that all things are, I think we're going to be more literate and say, surely this can be done. That's what I picture. I picture a world in which the citizens are going to say to the government, we know this can be done. Look, we've got all those cubic liters of natural gas now. Let's take some of the energy. Remember how we started this whole conference. How do we move from energy to knowledge base? Well, one of the ways is through investment. Invest the energy money and put it into some of these mobile apps that you all seem to be well ahead of, actually, even than Europe, which you think of as being a very hip place. But I haven't met anyone who's not been either texting or doing something, finding out something on their handheld. So I don't know if that doesn't really answer your question, because I can't say what the analytics should be, just that we now have that, which we never had before. You're pointing, but I can't see.
Yes, I want to congratulate you on the Cloud Computing Journal. It has been very useful to us and very informative. I want you to, if you can tell us, what advice would you give us for a public service, a government sector that is archaic in some senses, with manila folders and pieces of thread, holding up files, and you are trying to convince people, management, senior management in the public sector, that, this cloud thing, they have heard about it, but we want to get there. If you can give us a few pointers on that. Thank you very much.
I think we must be careful not to confute those two things. So e-government is a debate in and of itself. And I'm not actually sure that cloud is a game changer for that. So just be careful that you don't put words in my mouth. I think that is a battle and a discussion that should be fought at a citizen's level, saying, look, I can't, what's a typical example of, I'll give you a typical example of a mobile app, maybe this also answers Simon's question. Typical answer of a mobile app created in the last, 2 weeks. Doctors prescribe, people don't pick up the prescriptions, the doctor doesn't know it. So somebody says, that's not right, that doesn't sound like a very sensible use of anything, it's certainly not good health care. Why don't we have an app that really just traces that around? Right? So all I'm thinking of, there are examples where at the absolute lowest level, at the level where the problem is, somebody's built an app to solve a problem. E-government is a known problem set. I mean, well, government is a known problem set. I don't mean that in a negative way. What government is for is known. What we're trying to achieve is known. Different countries, different goals, but the whole notion of governance is there. We've been doing it for millennia. So I can't imagine that it can be very long before, at a local level, bright, smart, this third generation perhaps, if it can't be our children, maybe it'll be their children, can't simply say, we're not going to tolerate the manila folder, it's absurd. They lost my manila folder. Yeah, I had this terrible ailment, and it was all documented, and my manila folder is gone, so I didn't get any treatment. Come on. What citizen in 2015 is going to put up with that? So very much, we've talked a lot. I mean, I'm hearing very interesting things about this openness to bottom up in this country. So although I'm sure you're not denying that you're frustrated or whatever, or that things move slowly, but I think you'll find that some of these things are going to surprise you with the speed with which they move. Again, Estonia is the world's leader. The world's leader, this tiny little country. You can say that's why, it's easy to do it with so few, and yes, that's a factor. But America is trying pretty hard, and that's a huge society. And, Scandinavia tries very hard. They're sort of somewhere in the middle, 15 million odd. Voting online is becoming a reality. Have you asked for voting online? I mean, obviously there are identity issues, there are complications, but it's being solved. So in Estonia, you vote in a general election online, and they're completely comfortable with it. I met the president to prove it. It's extraordinary, and you can hardly believe it. I can't even work out the logistics of that, but they've accepted it. So it's up to you. I'm sorry to always push it back, but I think that's maybe what even governments will start to do. Yeah, they'll start to maybe be like the Russell Brice and say, what, we have all these tools. We'll tell you what the tools are, and then maybe you can help construct the future that we should be going on to. And this thing of transference, this thing of maybe they don't have, I mean, now I don't know, I'm making up examples, right? But maybe in Jamaica they don't still have the manila folders. Maybe they're ahead so that you can, you know, almost shame your own government into catching up. So maybe, you know, that's one way of pushing up the bar, of just trying to find brilliant examples and share them. Share who's doing it better. What's so horrible about that? I don't know if that answers or the question, but that's the best I can do. So I actually sort of separated it from cloud. That was actually all I wanted to do. I don't think that's a cloud problem set. I think it's more fundamental than that. That is an IT problem set. That if you're behind on that, then you need to catch up.
Yeah, Jeremy, I want to join with Josanne and say this was a very exciting session. And I could say authoritatively that you nailed it. And the reason why I could say that is because I know what we wanted to get, which was, and I said this yesterday afternoon, to get people to see things differently so that we will then act differently. And I wanted to add the degree to which you nailed it, just by what I think to you was an arbitrary random example when you spoke about the bus problem and a potential solution. I say that because my company has a software coding competition, which we actually had the finals of last week, Saturday. And it's for tertiary education students. And the team that won, that was the solution that they proposed and worked on. Now, I don't know about the back-end architecture that they had in mind for it. All of that they would have had to sit down and talk about, and that they're university students, they're final year students. My understanding from their presentation at the finals, it was something that they'd spoken to the bus company about. I have no idea as we talk now where that will go. But the point that I think that I really want to highlight and emphasize, and you're saying it, at the end of the day, it is for us to leave this room because we think differently, and for students who were in that competition last week to leave the university and go out there and actually make some of these things happen.
3,500 students majoring in IT, the minister told me the moment we got here. That's the key to all of this.
Correct.
Not because they can solve the problems, but because they are part of the solution.
Absolutely.
If you can weave them into the warp and weft of social change. He says, I've forgotten what I'm going to say.
All right. Jeremy, again, like everybody else, I want to thank you for that fantastic presentation. And it was interesting. Many parts were interesting. I'm just highlighting this one. You talked about the Central Intelligence Agency. And you said that the CIO from the CIA was at your session. And when he spoke of the budget that was required, because the CIA needs a private cloud, they need to invest in their own infrastructure in order to process, and because the data is sensitive and secure, it's government data. So when we think about cloud as government, we have some additional things to think about in terms of confidentiality, security, sovereignty, those kinds of issues. And the American government recognizes the need to put significant money behind that. And I thought that was an interesting...
It also has, I should say, that in parallel to that CIA as an example, another very pertinent example is it has this website data.gov, which is the manifestation of that cloud-first policy. That has more data in it than anyone had ever imagined.
So that thing about one open government where government's data gets pushed to the citizen, and the citizen has an ability to interact with it. Again, that's a cloud infrastructure that you need to build for that. But also in terms of closed user government applications where government alone,
Pick your example that here. In Scandinavia, all tax filings are public domain.
Just the point that there is a real need to get the benefit, you have to invest in it. And I think that was one of the things that came out. right?
This is just to ask our folks who are manning the online stuff, do we have any questions or comments? Because I haven't seen anyone, but I'd just like to know, do we have any? Okay, so nothing. Okay, yes, we do. What approach did all these companies using cloud services take towards managing cloud risk? Should I just run them through one by one?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you see the impact of cloud computing on the country's drive to develop an indigenous ICT industry? And what has been the impact on ICT staffing for companies that have chosen cloud as their major computing platform?
Okay, I can see there's like a trick question, that third one. So let's build up to that. Take them in order. So obviously risk mitigation is something that I haven't dwelt on, because my approach in that presentation was to say, you know what? These are household name companies. If you don't think that they have a risk officer involved in that process, then you don't understand business. So I'm not sure how much I should have drilled down into that, but this is a huge, huge field of trying to... the same man, he was actually the CTO of the CIA. The CTO of the CIA claims that for him, cloud computing is a safer environment than anything he's had hitherto. There is obviously someone who knows his stuff. But that to me was an extraordinary statement. So again, I merely pass it on, because I don't have any shares in the CIA. But that was, I could hardly believe my ears. So that's a slight answer, I mean perhaps only a partial answer to number one, that is being looked at all the time. You've got compliance in the health sector that admittedly has perhaps slowed up cloud computing a little. Because, you know, I wouldn't want my pancreatic stuff to be, it's one thing I tell you about it, but I don't want it to be just shoved out there. But, you know, those companies, they have solved those problems. I don't actually want people to know where I travel, so airlines, I hope, have solved it. You know, that's privacy. The second one, which was...
how do you see the impact of cloud computing on the country's drive to develop an indigenous ICT industry?
There I see it as the ultimate catalyst. There I can be completely bullish. I see it as the ultimate catalyst. Because if you are young and sitting in this room, or indeed if you are my age and sitting in this room, I'm not done yet in this world. There are things that you can now do in terms of starting up an enterprise or an organization. My children have started not-for-profits. That's, you know, very much the zeitgeist, I think, of some of the things we're talking about here. So just organizations, energy, making sure that's leveraged. IT helps, and cloud computing helps with that IT thing because it simply is affordable. And by the way, it's remote. So the success of these cloud providers, do we really care that we're paying a few pennies to Amazon who's based in Seattle? Does it really matter? I mean, do we have to have our own Amazon to go up in the cloud? Not really. So we can get going tomorrow. We can start this tomorrow. I run workshops in front of these expos that are simply designed to make sure that when the person leaves the room that morning, so 2-3 hours maybe, they have got a website, because I mean, most of us know about websites, but it's up on, let's say, Amazon's cloud, or there's a welter of other vendors. And it's not vendor specific, just to prove that that can be done. Now, what they decide then to put up in the cloud, that's up to them. That's what I'm saying. So I would think absolutely game-changing catalyst to you getting ICT startups going, organizations being more dynamic, including the symposium website, which I expect to see explode for these same reasons of people saying, but when I clicked on that, it didn't go anywhere. Well, that's not acceptable to me. So actually I've programmed it, and here's my code, and now it clicks through and you can see the videos or whatever it is. So it's got to be bottom up as well. And the third question, which I think was the sneaky one, was, I suspect, what was the idea that the cloud's going to basically steal jobs? Was that the subtext?
The impact on ICT
that was the
staffing.
subject, yes. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. So I don't mind being used for that. This is a macroeconomic question, isn't it? So America didn't invent globalization, but it really did make that word widely known, in the same way that you might argue America is making cloud computing widely known. So is there a secret agenda? I don't think so. In America, what happened, if you recall, and I'm not being facetious and I'm trying not to be political, but it did sort of go a bit wrong, didn't it? Globalization actually flattened things, and it seemed to bite America back. So we now have very wealthy third world. You've heard Jeff mention a few, particularly in the IT sector, hugely prosperous IT sectors now in the Philippines and Vietnam and Venezuela, just over the water there. That was because of globalization. So sort of what goes around comes around. So I actually don't think you will end up doing yourselves out of data processing jobs because the cloud now allows us to take it to somewhere cheaper. By the way, there isn't actually anywhere cheaper these days. India's not cheap. The Philippines is not cheap. These guys are, they've got a thirst now. They're driving 2 cars and they want, they want an iPhone. Their time has come. I think that's something to keep an eye on, but I don't think it's a flawed model. So send your money to Amazon and then, don't worry that you'll all be done out of a job. I think it'll create jobs. Why wouldn't it create jobs? Does that answer that one? I'm not sure.
Well, I'm going to put a wrap on this because Jeffrey's here for the rest of the day, and I'm sure the presentations and what have you are going to be available. And I would recommend that all the presentations, but this particular presentation be used across the board to government ministries, to private sector companies that are here, and certainly into Form 5s and Form 6s in our school system. It's been truly inspirational, Jeffrey. And
Jeremy.
With the duty of care. So let's give Jeffrey, again, one more round of applause.
Whoever.
I'm saying Jeffrey, Jeremy, sorry.
It matters
I'm
not.
getting my J's confused, sorry.
All the J's, it matters not. We are as one. Thank you so much for being a delightful audience. And that's been true, yesterday and then again today. I'm here all day. So.